Hey, AP Bio students, I wanted to go through some of the answers to your class sheets just to make sure we're ready to go for the test next Wednesday. We've gone over some of these before, so I just wanted to go through them again to make sure you knew what was going to be on Wednesday's test. So, Chapter 28 was kind of the start off point. Just going through the questions, monocot versus dicot. You have all these different things that we went through. I'm not really going to go through those again. Cell types, we went through these, some of these word names, parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, uh, which are important, but we really focused on xylem and phloem. Xylem carrying water from the roots up, and then phloem carrying sugar, solution water from the leaves down, normally or lateral. Describe examples of modified plants, so we went through those. Indeterminate growth happens on plant meristems. Remember, there is constant division at the shoots and the roots um, during the growth phase. So here in Indiana, uh, plants do not grow in the wintertime. They do not start growing until the leaves have popped out, and we've seen over the last week or so that a lot of plants have shed their protective coatings on their meristems and have actually started to grow, and that usually happens with water and temperature increases. As far as 2 year old twig and 4 year old twig, I showed you that picture in class. Primary growth in a branch versus a root, pretty easy. Roots go down to maximize nutrient diffusion, shoots go up to maximize exposure of the plant to the sun. And then the vascular cambium part, we went through that picture in class also, but the main focus was understanding that most of the time the middle of, say, like a tree is very much dead. We called that heartwood. And then as you move farther to the outside, that's when things start to come alive. Remember, xylem is dead, but phloem is alive, and phloem is right there next to the bark, which is why it's so important that bark is not ripped off of a tree. 29 sheet 1. What are some adaptations in shoots and roots that allow them to acquire resources? So they started to grow taller, their roots started to branch more to pick up resources from the soil. They developed xylem and phloem for long distance travel of water and sugar solutions. Leaves got bigger to catch more sunlight, and then other appendages, so like lateral branching of shoots, also allowed for more exposure to sunlight. Ion channels in plants, roles, the main ones being hydrogen ions and potassium ions. Hydrogen ions, we already know, very important in photosynthesis and cellular respiration in the production of ATP. And then potassium specifically is involved in the opening and closing of the stomata on the underside of a leaf to bring in carbon dioxide. The problem is you release water at the same time, and that's transpiration, which we'll get to here in a second. As far as water pressures go, this was a little bit different question. So you got two questions in one, and it's pretty simple. You go inside the plant plus the outside of the plant, and that will give you your total potential. So the first problem, you get a 0.4. That's megapascals. And because that's positive, water will move out of the plant cell, which is not necessarily a great situation. Then pure water has a potential of 0, so we would get a negative 0.9. So water would go into the plant cell, which is what we want most of the time in plant cells. So the big gist from that question is positive pressure, water moves out; negative pressure, water moves in. Potassium deficiency, you can see in color changes in the leaves, drying along the tips, margins of the leaves, where you will lack that green color in the leaves, and that could also lead to a plant that has its growth stunted. Are the essential elements more important than others? Yeah, they're all important. So the macronutrients plants need: a constant supply of nitrogen, Potassium, carbon, hydrogen, sulfur, oxygen, magnesium, phosphorus, kind of like us. Those are their macronutrients. They also need some micronutrients from the soil, but they definitely need those things to function on a daily basis. What roles do organisms in the soil play in plant nutrition? So, fertilization could happen in terms of maybe getting seeds to where they need to be in the soil to grow properly. Nutrient regulation, rock weathering, mutualism, earthworms play a big role for us in this area of the world in terms of breaking down soil, getting those organic macronutrients available for plants to use. And the mycorrhizae, remember that's the mutualism relationship between plants and fungi that can allow them to possibly take in nitrogen, get nitrogen from the air. 29 sheet 2. So we had some definitions. Cohesion tension hypothesis basically goes to water's characteristics, that water has the ability to hydrogen bond to itself. Water has the ability to hydrogen bond to other things. So cohesion is with itself, adhesion is with other things. And you would need both for water to move against gravity from the roots up towards the leaves. And that's that hypothesis. Translocation is the transport of that sugar solution water from the leaves all over the plant. And that's due to pressure flow. So on the previous homework, we had some pressure type questions. Sugars are transported through sieve tubes. We had that back 2 pages ago through osmosis when pressure builds at the source. So in the summer into the fall, the leaves are the source to make that sugar water, and then the sink would be the roots. So a lot of the time, the sugar solution water is moving from the source to the sink. Draw a root cross section. Apoplast, symplast, transmembrane. There's a great picture in the book. I'm sure you drew it well there. How does the plant keep unwanted solutes or minerals from getting into the vascular tissue? They have an endodermis, which is a checkpoint for selective passage of minerals, and then they have a Casparian strip, which I think you drew in the picture before that, which will ensure that no minerals can reach vascular tissues without crossing selectively permeable membranes. What are some strategies plants use to limit water loss? How do these things impact transpiration? So we had our transpiration lab, and that was a great lab to help you understand transpiration, the loss of water from the leaves. So warmth and wind will increase transpiration and increase the loss of water from the plant. Humidity, which is basically how much water is in the air, will decrease transpiration from the plant. And it's always about water balance for all plants. So they can lose water through the leaf cuticles. That's why they have guard cells and that potassium, which can open and close guard cells of the stomata on the underside of leaves. And then last semester we talked about the difference between 3C, C4, and CAN plants, and how some plants use different strategies to get carbon dioxide in at certain times, to change it into organic acids, and so they can keep their stomata closed, so they're not losing a huge amount of water. Describe how a root can be a sink during the summer and a source during the spring. Describe the process of moving sugars from a sink to a source. So, when can the root be a sink? That's in the summer and fall, when all the sugars are made during photosynthesis in the leaves from the sunlight and during the Calvin cycle. So that's when sugars would start to move towards the roots. And then in the wintertime, the roots actually become a source, and parts of the stem become a source because that sugar congregates there and is protected in the roots and in the stems, such that when they do want to start growing again in the early spring, all those sugars can relocate into the meristems to produce ATP, so the plants can massively grow. Why do phloem and sieve tube cells, remember, transport that sugar solution water? Why does phloem need to be alive? It's because ATP is needed to move that sugar solution water. And alive cells can only make ATP. Dead cells cannot. So xylem cells are dead because you don't need ATP to move water, even though it's against gravity, because you have the cohesion tension hypothesis. Whereas phloem, you're going to need some ATP to get that sugar where you need it to be in the plant. Chapter 30, why are flowers deceitful? Pretty easy. They trick animals into pollination. They're bright. They smell nice. Some don't smell nice. Some smell like rotting meat, but that attracts some insects. Describe the different ways plants can reproduce without sexual reproduction. So one of the main ways is fragmentation, where you can literally cut a piece of a plant and plant it, and it could turn into an adult. And I know Mr. Holzer in his botany class does an experiment like that every first semester, where they do some fragmentation experiments and cut some plants and get them to grow into adults away from the original adult plant. This was actually my summer job in high school, and I have that on here, where I worked for a strawberry farm, and my job was to cut parts of strawberry plants and to relocate them in other parts of the field. And boy, was that a lot of fun every single day planting strawberry plants. But a good experience because now I can talk about it. What are the different structures on a flower? What are their functions? So you really need to go back to your flower anatomy sheet and make sure you look at that for this test. And then understand the physiologies, where the stamen, the male part, is where the pollen is produced. Pollen is like sperm. It's haploid. It's going to be the male part, the male haploid part of a plant, and it will need to meet up with the ovule, which is the haploid female part of the plant. The petals attract the pollinators, insects, animals. Sepals are those green things, the green like leaves, very close to the petals, but their job is to pretty much protect the ovules, which would be very close to them internally inside the plant. And then the pistil is the main, like, runs right down the middle of the flower, and that would be the area where the pollen have access to get to the ovules. So ovules are buried deep at the bottom of the pistil, and pollen would have to move through the pollen tube to get to the ovules, and two pollens would have to do that, and we'll talk about that here in a second. I have a plant in my garden that has flowers with only stamens. That means it's a male-only flower. Are they complete or incomplete? Well, they're obviously incomplete because they only have a stamen. If they had a stamen and a pistil, they would be complete. Are they monoecious or dioecious? So that plant is dioecious. Dioecious meaning that particular plant has a separate male flower or part and a separate female flower or part. Or there might be another plant, like there might be a female plant and a male plant in some species. Monoecious means that both sexes are present on one flower, and that's what our picture was about. It showed the pistil down the middle and the stamen with the pollen around the outside. What's the purpose of the second fertilization? So remember, two pollens, sperms, have to unite with the ovule. One will become the zygote, the seed. It's an embryo, literally an embryo plant. The other one will become the endosperm, and the endosperm is the food, the nutrients for that growing embryo. So, and we tend to eat those. Like you think about eating peas or corn, and then many other examples, lima beans, baked beans. You are eating the embryo, but our main focus is eating the endosperm, which would have all the nutrients in it. How can an animal pollinator encourage speciation in plants? This goes right along with coevolution from the last unit. So a lot of great examples out there, but best examples usually involve lynx, beaks in birds, and the proboscis, which is kind of like a beak in an insect. They have to be long enough to be able to get to the nectar, but at the same time, the plant wants those insects or birds to pick up pollen. Sorry, you can hear my dogs fighting in the background. Describe how a plant embryo develops after fertilization. I'm not too worried about this. I'm really not even going to read it. You can take a look at it, pause it to see if your answer matches up with mine. And I'm going to stop there because I'm not sure if you have Chapter 31, Sheet 1, and Chapter 31, Sheet 2 done yet. But that's just a quick little review of our botany unit, the first couple chapters.